Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we'll be studying the Declaration of Independence. As you pause to look it up online, I'd like to thank you for joining us as we take one step further on our journey through the history and foundation of the United States of America. Why did this nation separate? How was it set up? What do we need to do to keep going? Join us as we discuss these questions and more. Would you like to be a part of what we're doing? Pray for each other and for us, fellowship in your own study, then go forth and make disciples. Really quick, as a note, next week we'll be starting into this book, A Tea Partier's Guide, The Constitution Made Easy by Michael Holler. Notes are in the description. Find your own copy if you want to follow along and read with us. All right, who is reading first?
This is Chuck, and I'll begin the reading, taking up where we left off last time with the offenses of the crown. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, given his assent to their acts of pretend legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions.
All right, I'm Joshua. I'm picking it up. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren, who have warned them from time to time of attempts made by their legislator to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, the harder ones coming up, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends.
And my name is Gage, and I'll be reading the last section here. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
All right. Well, let's go into first thoughts. What'd you guys see here today?
I really liked in the last paragraph how um, I don't want to say it, they pointed to God twice in the last paragraph. Um, at the end, they say with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence.
Hmm.
And then at the beginning, they said appealing to the supreme judge of the world for rectitude of our intentions. So, they knew what they were doing, but they knew that they were still under authority of God, whether or not they were under the authority of the British.
And I'm glad you brought that up because that first part you brought up, the one at the very end, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. Some fake historians say that these guys were merely deists and not Christians. If you merely believed that there was a God, but did not believe that he um, moved in the affairs of man, this sentence would not be here.
Yeah, I don't think I realized like just how Christian, I guess the early United States was.
Hmm.
Uh, so that's really cool to see.
Yep,
I appreciate that.
we'll see more later. All right, Chuck, how about
Earlier
you?
up, we continue to see the offenses that, you wonder how many of these piled on top of each other
Hmm.
made it to the point of where, okay, we're going to do this thing, right? Because some of these offenses have been going on for a long time, and I guess there was debate about, well, it's not so bad. We're we're British citizens first. Maybe we should go along with this.
Hmm.
But then they just kept piling up, and you get the feeling by the time you've read through all of them, okay, we've had enough. This is
Hmm.
it. Yeah.
I am going to quote something else. The gentleman from Wall Builders, from whom a lot of my knowledge comes from. Um, the For imposing taxes on us without our consent. We finally read it. Out of 26, I believe, complaints, it's number 17. So once again, going back to a false historian saying we did it for taxation without representation.
Mm.
Um, no, not by itself. There was a lot more going on there. It wasn't merely a financial issue. Another thought I had is some of these at times feel shoots at odds with each other, these orders from the king. Like it's at sometimes it appears he's taking over a territory by enlarging a different territory. Other times he's just wholly abandoning territories and calling them and being at war with them. This was 13 colonies with different governances. So he did not treat them all the same. We are called the United States. States is a word that was its own country. They were at the beginning a united 13 small countries with which the British Empire had different behaviors and treatments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I never thought about it that way.
Um,
Well, other than the Intercontinental Congress, whenever it came into being, it was kind of the representation of all 13, right?
Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
I-
I don't know our history enough to know how long they had existed, but it sounds like whatever legislative ability they thought they may have had, it was proven time and time again here that they really didn't, that it was being taken away from them.
yep. On that topic, last time we met, there was this fun one that we scratched our heads over. I'm going to go back to last week. He has refused for a long time after such disillusions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. The legislative powers. So what I believe is being hinted here is anarchy. It's a warning against anarchy. Anarchy is every man for himself, everybody doing what he wants for himself. All it takes to be a governor in anarchy is for you and a buddy to set up a government. Now you're two people, and every one man you come against, you got a better odds at beating them. So if the king, after dissolution, after dissolving, oh, it says dissolve. Sorry, uh, restart the thought. After he has dissolved represented houses, did not allow new elections to take place, the powers that were laid down would be picked up by people who were not elected, either from the outside invading them or scoundrels from within. Those powers cannot be annihilated. Somebody would pick those up
Mm.
because they cannot be annihilated.
Right. I think it gets back to decisions being made at the local level. If you're not, or if the big government is not ordaining or empowering those local decision makers, then somebody is going to take that, fill that void, right?
Yep. All right. So now we talk about the military. Now we get into a lot more military matters. We started off with a lot of judicial, a lot of legislatural, a lot of governing. Now we've got the military branch stepping in. So let's get started with he has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. Garrisoning forces. This hasn't yet touched their homes, but just standing armies, which, if you know anything about armies, armies without anything to do will get into trouble. Actually, that's humans. Humans without anything to do will get into trouble, like teenagers.
I
What
think
are your
this is
guys' thought on that?
the first thing that comes to my mind is the regarding the military was the Quartering Act, and I believe that was when the king required the citizens of the colonies to give shelter and housing to the military whenever they basically wanted it, um, and that must have been something. Just gonna knock on your door one day, like, okay, you've got this platoon of 50 men that you have to house and feed for the next however long.
Yeah. Who wants to have fun drawing up this modern day comparison with gangs from foreign nations being brought in and housed in America and
I
not
can
in people actually oh wait squatting actually in people's homes that they are trying to rent or sell.
Yeah, I can see the line there, the string.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've seen it. We've seen it within the last century. If you look at what Nazi Germany did, and they would go in, they would just take over people's houses, throw them out,
Hmm.
put them in camps, take all their possessions and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, they did that with oh Sorry, I'm getting the military. Well, the German government and military were one and the same. So when they moved out the Jews out of the nice neighborhoods that they had built up and put them in the ghettos and moved everybody out the ghettos into the nice neighborhoods, there was some of that. He is affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. Didn't they try that in Rome? Isn't that how Caesar became the first Caesar? I remember that being a plot of a movie with Russell Crowe in it, uh, Gladiator. And
Yeah.
that was one of the things is you have an army, you can be very political.
I like how I don't like, but later on in the declaration here when they talked about um where was it? When they say that we have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. It's
Mhm.
like the the British Army and I mean even the Crown, they just completely forgot and ignored the fact that these are, British citizens too. Like they came under, for whatever reason, they still were British citizens regardless of where they were living. And the military was, you know, they were made to be higher by the crown, and they sure as heck reminded and took advantage of that situation as best they could.
Mhm.
Um,
This is
And
this
we
is
see, and I suppose when we get into the Constitution, we'll see the basis for this law. But this definitely them having been subjected to that. In other words, the military having power over the civil power
Mhm.
is the reason we structured so military could never be used for law enforcement in this country. That would always be local, uh, and to this day holds true.
the interesting thing is as the president of the United States, as we'll see later, is in charge of the executive branch, that makes him commander in chief of the military, making it a firmly underneath the civil, what you're alluding to, underneath the civil, the military stays underneath the civil authority.
Yep.
We'll see some.
We see it during the not necessarily military, but we see it in the disaster response. The ones that work the way they should work is the local authorities take over coordination, and then all the federal resources that are sent are work through them. All right.
Mhm. Yep. All right. He has combined with others to subject us to the jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. That sounds like, oh boy, I think the modern day example spells this out best. In our Constitution, there's a part that says any treaty we make surpasses the Constitution, something like that, or becomes the law of the land, a treaty we make with a foreign nation. And some people were worried when certain presidents were making treaties with the UN or Paris, just to name a few, that if those governing bodies, by the Constitution, those governing bodies could come in and be equal to the federal government in how they dictate what things are happening on the local level.
I would like to think that that wouldn't be allowed to happen. I mean, that's crazy, but I guess it depends what the government in power does.
Yeah. There's a
The
fun movie for watching to help understand British politics. It's called Cromwell, and it's really awesome because you see Obi-Wan Kenobi get killed again. I think he's like Sean Bean, he always dies. But he played uh the actor plays the king, and it starts out with the king trying to get the people to rise up to help him fight the Irish, and he beats them up, his own people up so much that they rebel and he has to hire the Irish to fight his people.
Is that based on that's a true story?
Based on a true story. I don't know. I do not trust Hollywood's rendition of history, but that's what this movie talked about. So I think I've seen enough in history, especially since the Christmas raid that George Washington does, the one where he's in the boats, the famous painting, is against Prussian soldiers that were mercenaries, which we see later on. He, from the history that I know, not the best historian, mind you, just a guy who's having fun. Um, King George had problems getting the British to fight the Americans and had to hire mercenaries to come in and fight them. And so that great Christmas crossing to disable the Hussars was the Christmas Day miracle, except for the British, the Redcoats. So,
What few British were there? There were a lot of mercenaries, as you say.
yeah. And later during the Napoleonic Wars, the British had to use um, prisoners and madmen to fill their ranks. So they would actively charge you with a crime. You'd go into the regiment to fight Napoleon, and if you fought your way through, you'd get your freedom back. So, yay.
That's just a draft with extra steps.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who would you rather facing your enemy? The normal farm plow guys or the guys who already practice at stealing and killing? I mean,
Yeah. The way you described it, I was picturing like just randomly charging people with crimes and then like, oh well, you're a criminal now. You can either go to jail or go to war.
well, both
Yeah, yeah, I suppose it was.
accuse innocents and take the criminals out.
Yeah. So getting back to the declaration here, that paragraph that you just read, which constitution are they referring to? Because it says a jurisdiction foreign to our constitution.
Before the Declaration, before the Constitution and the Declaration, there was another um, attempt at the 13 colonies to work together, and it didn't work out that well. But from its burnt ashes, the phoenix of the United States Constitution rose. I forget what that's called.
I'm gonna look that up.
Yeah, it didn't work well. It was clunky, but there was an agreement between the states.
There was a charter.
What's that?
I don't think it was that. There was a charter. The starts with an M, but that was done early on, almost in the days of the Pilgrims.
Yeah.
And oh, Magna Carta. That's it. Magna
No,
Carta.
that's England. That's Old England. That was one of the first documents. This was in the colonies. The Magna Carta was a charter that was forced on the king by the nobles because the king was doing back then these exact things. There's another great movie from Hollywood I've seen that talks about it, but it also had Russell Crowe in it.
He's
We're
a
on a,
rebellious kind of guy.
oh my goodness. We need to talk to that guy, see what he knows about history.
Yeah, get him on the show.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. All right,
Uh,
so I was looking that up.
yeah, so according to Google, just real quick search, it just says that each of the 13 colonies had its own charter,
Yeah,
and that kind of outlined the terms of its governance. So maybe they're referring to like the initial, I suppose, charter that the crown gave them,
yeah.
and now the crown was going back on that and superseding that even.
And unacknowledging it.
Oh, the Articles of Confederation. That was
That's
the
it.
Constitution.
Ah,
Yeah. Not the Confederate troops in the Civil War, different Confederation. All right. And finally, I think this is brings us to the end of the armies. No, two more lines for the armies. But this is what you brought up earlier, Gage. For quartering, Large bodies of armed troops among us. That's what you brought up earlier. Not only the standing armies, but making us feed them and house them. And then finally, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they would commit on the inhabitants of these states. So not only basically leaving troublemakers there, but protecting them so that they can continue to make trouble.
Yeah, and assuming that, the pattern of England not being able to staff their army with willing soldiers, these were probably prisoners and convicts that were sent over there. So they're over there with no government now, uh no residing governing body of all at all, and they're just over there doing whatever they want to, and they know they can get away with it because it's just going to be a mock trial afterward anyway.
No police force, they are the police force.
Yeah. And
And now, economic problems. So first the judicial, then the military, now we get into the economics. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consents, and then back to the judicial, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of the trial by jury. Actually, that one I feel is a little bit more of a wrap up because jury trials, what they were and what they are two separate things. Back in those days, the founding fathers, and we'll see this in the Constitution a little bit later, possibly, I don't know where it's from. The jury was not only there to decide the guilt of the parties or the innocents or to reward damages, but also to sit in judgment on the law itself. If there was a bad law that somebody was brought in under, the jury, or a bad lawsuit, the jury was to sit in on the bad law itself. It was to be a great mediator between the parties, whether they were businessmen and businessmen, people and people, or government and people and government and government. So it wasn't just the judge, but it was also the jury who would also look at these things. So, which has been pretty much neutered at this point because the judge tells the jury what they can and cannot consider. Of course, in some cases, the law is there for a good reason. So what's your thoughts on this?
yeah, I was looking up some stuff as you were talking there, and so I just look up what was a jury trial like during the Articles of Confederation, so kind of just a little bit before this, and it says judges as deciders. So judges had the definitive word on matters of law, and jurors were to apply the judge's law of the case to the facts as they found them. So I guess that's kind of similar to the way it
Or,
is now, where they
yeah,
judges
or I
kind
could
of
be wrong.
tell them what the law is, and they kind of decide how to apply it, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, in this, they don't even have the jury. It's just the judge.
Yeah, yeah, there was no jury, and the judges were set up by England anyway, so it didn't none of that mattered.
Now, this reads the benefits of trial by jury. Are you saying they translated jury as something different?
Possibly. I think we're going to see that in the Constitution. I don't want to hang my hat on it, but I do believe, and I heard, and this is an old memory, that part of jury deliberations are whether or not it's a good law in the first
Which
places.
they would get that input from the judge, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Like, do you guys remember, Gage, you might be a bit too young for this, but when the internet first came out, people started sharing the stupid laws of their towns, like don't go for a walk with an ice cream in your back pocket. And that law was in place so that somebody wouldn't do that, and the neighbor's horses start following him, trying to eat the ice cream. He was stealing a horse instead of using reins, he was using ice cream. And so instead of saying you're stealing the horse, they would say, all right, no more carrying ice cream in your back pocket. So, like, if you get that in front of a jury, they're going to strike that down and say, no, he stole a horse. He just used ice cream instead of reins.
I've never heard that law explained before. That's almost genius.
Yeah,
That is
that's when people
genius.
ignore the spirit of the law and work on the words of the law.
Yeah.
Isn't that fun? I'm gonna go buy some ice cream. Oh, wait, I'm in Florida. I can't buy ice cream, put it in my back pocket. It won't last. Go walking down the street, there's a whole chocolate smear down the pant leg. That's not gonna look good.
No. Lots of horses to get though down here.
Yeah.
Maybe that should be the law down here.
Walk up to a Ocala.
Yeah.
And in some cases, the judges weren't even in the colonies because this next one, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses.
That sounds like a way to make something go away to get a
Yeah.
troublemaker out of out of the way
What was it
and
you
send
said
him off.
last time, Gage? 3 to 4 month journey each way?
Yeah, I believe that's what it was.
Yeesh. Yeah, Chuck, back to your point there.
Yeah, at least 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the weather.
Oh,
And
two
this,
months.
yeah, so they take him over there, they try him on that pretended offense, they become a prisoner, then they make him a soldier and send him back to fight against the colonies. Really
It's
does go full
genius.
circle.
Genius. Your husband goes missing. 6 months later, he comes by knocking. I need to be quartered here. That might also be a very bad idea. They probably got, oh my goodness, they probably pulled a, shoot, what was the empire that shifted everybody around? I think it was Babylonian Empire to the Jews, to the Israelites. They spread them out all everywhere and they brought new people in. The British Empire probably took people they captured from the colonies and sent them to India, and people they captured from India and the Prussians and sent them to the colonies. And then most died because they're not used to the weather
And the food
and the food.
and the water.
Oh yeah, and the mosquitoes
Yeah.
and the yeah. All right. And then here's a nice way to get around governance. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. They might be talking about Canada there.
So they set up a neighboring province, made it huge, and then used that to rule and
Sent
fit
over,
insurance.
yeah,
Okay, I see.
sent over letters that say your boundaries just increased by 3 colonies. Congratulations. Go rule them.
Hmm.
Tyranny through confusion.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what that um territory was.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
gonna say
the Quebec Act. Yeah,
Quebec.
yeah. So the Quebec Act of the British Parliament in 1774 extended the boundaries of the province of Quebec into the Ohio River Valley, which was territory claimed by the American colonies.
Oh,
Hmm.
Yeah, so you get a problem colony, you just put something else over it government wise, and then that gets rid of the problem, I guess.
yeah. And Quebec still honors the crown to this day.
The English crown? I didn't know that.
The Canadian loon is on the $1 coin, calling it a loonie. Queen Elizabeth, well, they might have to remint it since Queen Elizabeth died, but she's on the toonie, the $2 coin. So there's still Canada, Australia, I think New Zealand are still subjects to the British crown.
But I thought Canada was mainly French, but
Montreal.
okay.
Let's not get into that lest I offend the French. French lost. The French lost in Canada and some state.
You could have just ended that at the French lost and you would have
Yeah.
summed it all up right there.
We're taking away our charter, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of government. I'm looking at the time. I really want to get into these last two paragraphs. So let's go through these last few complaints quickly. For suspending our own legislature and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. That might be Canada coming south and telling people what to do. And then he has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. So it sounds like he said, you're no longer under my protection, so I can now go to war against you. And that gets followed up a little bit later. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens to take captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. Um, and finally, he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us in his endeavor to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. I want to say he only hired the merciless Indian savages, not the peaceful Indian natives. Those guys stayed home. It was only the savages that declared war on the colonies. I want to make
Yes.
that clear.
It is interesting though how we kind of adapted that style of warfare, against the British, that guerrilla warfare style.
Yep.
A little full circle moment there too.
And then finally, we come to the closing arguments. Because, like you just looked up on Google, the history of back then, people knew these acts were. They were in the newspapers, they were in the print, they were in the presses. The Stamp Act was to make printing things more expensive, to slow down the proliferation of the information that people needed to see what was coming their way. And the horrors brought about by Crown. And at this time, still, they were asking to stop until they got to the mode where they said no more. And that's where we're at. It's interesting thinking about it after reading all of these destructions against the colonies. How open rebellion and just anarchy had not yet ruled in the colonies. They were still asking for redress, asking for relief, asking for this. But violence was going to repay violence very soon, and it could either be focused or it could be well, there was another revolution at that time. It was in France. It could be like the French Revolution. Absolute mobs and swarms of people. Um, good book I read on that, I believe, was A Tale of Two Cities. Darlin, was A Tale of Two Cities about the French Revolution?
Yes, studied it
Yes.
in high school.
Okay. Yeah, and that one
I made a
outlined.
guillotine for my project.
Oh, oh, really?
Yeah.
We're conservative. Don't admit that online, okay? Or it was for carrots, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe potatoes. But there's a, but there was, it got, the bloodbath got so huge, they were just looking to keep killing people, not for justice, just for the bloodletting. A madness had overtaken them, and and keeping the desire for war contained and not letting it slip and devour everything must have been, after these wrongs, a monumental feat.
Yeah, how much different would things have looked? Because you read through the Declaration and they didn't the colonists didn't want to do this.
Yeah,
Like you were saying, they fought every step of the way to avoid this at all costs. And how much different would our history look if we'd ended up, going through the revolution in a similar manner to the way that the French did. And yeah, like that would have completely shaped the culture of the early United States, and like how much different would things look now if we were, raised not raised if we were if the nation was kind of birthed under that extreme violence rather than the, I don't want to say cordialness that it was birthed under, but the
measured response.
yeah.
Cordialness does work. We were politely telling them no, but it was still a firm no. The answer is no. If you don't like the way I'm saying it now, keep pushing. I'll say it differently, but the answer is still no. So, all right. They have petitioned for redresses. Only repeated injury is the response. Once again, marking him a tyrant. Going to this next paragraph. Consanguinity. Hey, I pronounced it correctly that time. That means common ancestry, common, almost a neighborhood feel, but through time. We've been part of the same siblings, the same English common law. We have been countrymen for so long, but to deny that, they too have been deaf to the voice of justice, and not only of justice, to also to the fact that we are brethren. So, so not only
Yeah,
did they get relief from the military, nor the king, nor even the subjects of the crown. And now we come to the closing final decision. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world, back to your point, Gage, for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, not the bad people, just the good people. The bad people need to leave. We're going to kick them out. I'm doing a Trump voice. Oh, I've been watching. I'm actually doing Steven Crowder doing a Trump voice. That's why. Solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. So, not like we grew up, the United States, they are their own distinct nations that are free and independent, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, well, we'll come back to that. So, what are you guys' thoughts on the first half of that paragraph there?
the first thing that comes to my mind is, what do you think the King of England was thinking when he read this for the first time? You have these 13 colonies across the ocean that really don't have anything for themselves, and they're over there saying like, nope, we're free now. And I would imagine it was probably a pretty big stroke of arrogance on the king. He just said, oh, we'll just go squash this real quick.
Yeah. Um, King George was insane at the time, actually.
Yeah,
There was the blue urine, and there's a whole mess of things. I think it's The Madness of King George is the movie that talks about it the most. Um, yeah,
yeah, that's my understanding as well, is that at this point, um, the things that they were blaming on the king were more that I think the prime minister is, really the one that was actually doing all of this. But
the
they needed,
Parliament.
yeah, they needed somebody to, make the bad guy to excite the people. So the king was the scapegoat.
Well, it was all done in his authority.
Yeah, it's true.
Um, I forget when this happened, but the prime minister took over governance of the government of Great Britain. I don't know when that happened, and the king turned the royalty turned into more of a figurehead. Because maybe an entire family that goes crazy every now and again isn't the best people to lead a country. All right. And then finally, as they are independent states, they can now do these other acts. And finally, the last sentence, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other. And this, ladies and gentlemen, this is the capstone for politics. This is the measurement I use to judge anybody. We pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honors. Sacred honor. There are many people out there who are generous with other people's lives, other people's fortunes, and other people's sacred honor, but not these guys. And that is one of the most important. Oh, wife has a story of when I asked somebody who was canvassing for a political official when I asked her that question. And she looked at me like, what? Yeah, how does the declaration end? And why is it important that it ends that way? She's like, it says yes. No.
Man, that is an incredibly high bar. Like nobody in politics comes close to clearing that bar. But how many people can we point to in our lives that can clear that bar?
I can think of a few. Um, but by starting with their own, by going out and being the first people to instigate, many of these guys who actually signed this were killed, their houses burned, their families ended. We only hear of the few that survived to tell the tale. But that's what they spent. They started with their lives. One guy ran around on his word, on his ability to make money, asked to borrow money to support George Washington's army to fight. Um, and that was his sacred honor. Not only did he give all of his fortune, then he borrowed money from his neighbors and said, on my word, on my life, I will pay you back so that we can win. And George Washington, of course, led the army. So,
Yeah, I'm sitting here reading through the names that signed this, and you're right. We know I'm by no means a historian. I probably know way less than most people, but I only know the big names. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, the Adams. Yeah, that'd be really interesting to go through and learn of, what happened to the rest of the people that signed the Declaration.
mhm.
the three in Georgia have counties named after them. Gwinnett, Hall, and Walton are all counties in North Georgia. I suspect you probably would find something similar in a lot of the states.
Yeah. Yeah, in Connecticut, there's Huntington.
You may be dead and your family may have ended, but you got a county named after you.
At least we recognize the sacrifice, right?
Hmm.
Um,
I did.
didn't
That
pass
is.
away. It didn't pass away lightly. And then uh, in Massachusetts, you see Samuel Adams.
Mhm.
And what was the other Adams?
John. John Adams.
John. Yeah.
And then there was John
Oh, they're
Adams.
both there. Yeah, single man.
John Adams' son, John Quincy Adams,
Became president.
trained Abraham Lincoln, and at 8 years old did drill with the Revolutionary soldiers, carrying one of those old rifles that I think the rifle weighed 60. You know what? I'm going to misquote it. It was a heavy wooden stock single action muzzle loader that an 8-year-old was carrying around and doing drills with. So
Who was this? This was John Quincy Adams or Abe Lincoln?
John Quincy Adams.
Wow.
So John Quincy Adams grew up during this period. His father was here, became second president. Um, as John Quincy Adams, his career extended. Um, he became president. Then um, he was unpopular, but then he went back into Congress, and Abraham Lincoln was one of his clerks. So when it came time for the Civil War, there was a two-generation direct descendant, Abraham Lincoln to John Adams. Not not his son, but mental um discipling happening through those two lines, raising up the next generation to fight on, keep
I'm
going.
sure that was heavily advertised during that time.
That's a good question. I don't know about that. Because John Quincy Adams was not considered by history a good president.
Yeah, but I believe John Adams was, if you could point to the connection between those two,
Yeah.
that could be influencing.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen, it is time for final thoughts.
Seeing if I can find like what Lincoln's campaign was on and see if I
Okay.
can find any mention.
Well, thank God for each and every one of these names listed here and the sacrifices they made. The insight and divine guidance they partook of to do this, as we spoke about, in somewhat of an orderly fashion and not in complete chaos. And then, many of these names also went on then to form the new government after the war. So we'll be very thankful for them.
Well said.
Yeah. My final thought is it is from this stock that we have inherited what we have. It is good to bring some friends along and reread through it and understand what it is about, what has happened, and that history is not as far away as we think, as we see it happening in front of us. Um, but the cost must always be paid by men who are willing to stand up and sacrifice. sacrifice their own lives, their own fortunes, and their own sacred honors to rely on God and to rely upon each other. And that's one thing that, especially among conservatives, I don't see is relying on each other. Everybody runs as far as they can in one direction, and not a lot happens. They don't work together as well. Um, there's not what these guys had a lot of conversation where they come together and harmonize and work together. They iron out their differences so that they can press on and might as well air the dirty laundry so that they can say, okay, we've aired the dirty laundry, we've had the argument, but this is more important and we need to focus on this. And that's what we see these men do.
Yeah, that spirit of unity that you touched on, and that is what's missing in today's not only political landscape but cultural landscape. We're so divided, and that's the biggest. I think that's the biggest issue that faces this country is the fact that we can't agree on anything.
Mhm.
Man, it's crazy how far we've come from being able to unite on something as crazy as war, but we can't decide what a man and woman are, like
Or
it's just,
whether people who deny that should have any authority.
yeah, crazy.
All right, I'll close this out in prayer. Heavenly Father, e pluribus unum, out of the many one. We are human beings with our own ideas, our own prerogatives, and our own destination. Unique individuals that you know the name of each and every one. We cannot go alone and save each other, Lord. We need your help and we need each other's. Help us to harmonize. Help us to iron out difficulties. Help us to have the important conversations. And those who just rant and rave and cry and are tyrants against us, give us the strength to recognize them and to defend ourselves against them. As we seek to put this country back on a course where we protect the innocent, protect those who cannot protect themselves, and introduce them to your law that governs hearts and makes humans better to each other than they naturally can be. Be with us in that endeavor. In your name, amen.
Amen.